Welcome to the Pregnancy Help Podcast. I'm Christine Grimmett, and in this episode, we'll hear from Andrea Trudden, Vice President of Communications and Marketing at Heartbeat International, and Lisa Bourne, the Managing Editor of Pregnancy Help News. And you may recognize Lisa from our monthly Pregnancy Help News Brief episodes as well. So we welcome both of you to our episode. And as we hear about this topic of media readiness and how to be prepared for those interview requests, especially around times like election seasons, I want to remind our listeners that we do have additional resources and training available through Heartbeat Academy. And I'll add some links and information in the show notes on all of that. And we also encourage you to reach out to Heartbeat if you ever have specific questions on this topic. So with that, I'll turn things over to our experts, Andrea and Lisa.
Thank you so much, Christine. And we're grateful to be able to come here today to really talk about media. One, Lisa and I are immersed in it all the time, and more so Lisa than I. It is a good reminder to pause and take a moment to look at your organization and see what are your policies? How have you talked about this with your staff? And do you need to talk about it with your staff? The answer is yes, but we'll get into some of those details in just a little bit. But I do want to give Lisa a moment to really give her background, because she really is a wealth of knowledge, and we're very blessed to have her here at Heartbeat International because of her history and how she's able to help us really hone in on our messaging and really work through how to communicate effectively across the board. So Lisa, could you give a little bit of a history as to what your past includes and how you got to Heartbeat?
Well, sure. I've been just actually this week hit my 5-year mark with Heartbeat, and it's been a blessed time. Of course, it's a wonderful organization, and if I may, the probably the most significant cause to be involved in affirming the Lord's gift of life. I have been a journalist in some form for over 20 years, and that has been primarily been print, but not exclusively print. It's also been in some form of radio here and there, but mainly print. I've been in general communications, but journalism and communications typically involving the pro-life cause and or faith-based organizations, Catholic diocese, the Methodist Church, what have you. I've had some secular newspaper experience. That's kind of how I got started. On the side as a mom, I was freelancing for the local shopper, if you will, that became successful enough that the local paper ended up buying it and then ending it because it was competition. So, I was taking children with me to interview folks, or I was going to city council meetings, and they gave me a shot. I was very grateful for that. But in radio, I've done some live radio myself as a host, but then also producing our bishop at the time's live radio show weekly. And that was a wealth of experience as well. But working in the trenches with writing about the pro-life cause in the years leading up to Heartbeat. And it was through a colleague that knew that there was an opening here and knew of my background and skills that kind of put me in touch with folks, and just kind of landed here with a little bit more than I think that they were expecting in terms of a punch to try to bring the content to a new level, if you will. Because even if you are not a media junkie or a media professional, I like to consider myself both to some degree. The media is integral in all our lives to some degree, whether we understand that or recognize that or not. And we're here today to help folks who maybe it isn't their wheelhouse or something that comes naturally to them understand its meaning in their role and how to navigate it so that they can better serve in their role.
I am going to jump in here because, as we know from working directly with Lisa and being friends as well, she's very humble. So she's not even touting the fact that, she has decades of experience in the writing. She's also an amazing photographer. So if you go to pregnancyhelpnews.com and look at what she's been putting together, she is our managing editor. So she is not only writing articles, taking photos, but also managing quite a team, an amazing team of freelance writers across the board. And we get to tap into that every so often. So my history is in journalism and communication. So I get to throw in some articles occasionally about Heartbeat International or the landscape of pregnancy help. And then, of course, working with our external media contacts as well for doing things like podcasts or interviews with external media. So it's a great outlet. If you have not seen Pregnancy Help News, I do encourage that now, because you'll really see how we strive to communicate the impact of pregnancy help in a positive way, while also, of course, sharing the news, because it's not all positive. So it is a balance that we look to, because pregnancy help needs to be known more. And this is one way that we can help get the word out even more. And so we want to equip you guys listening with some information as to how you can be an effective communicator and take advantage strategically of growing relationships, of intentionally connecting with both local and national media, and then tapping into resources in a very positive way within your own organization to create a media policy within your own center or maternity home. So, Lisa, I want to kind of really kick it off with the importance of effective communication. We communicate with our supporters and with our clients, but that's one aspect, or I guess two aspects of our work. Take it beyond that.
So it's interesting that you threw in the photography element there in our earlier conversation, and it just brought to mind for me, one thing that I get out of that is I see beauty, I recognize it, I want to capture it, and I want to share it with others, and that's conveying something, that's telling a story. So photography can tell a story as much as a print article can tell a story, or a radio interview or a television interview can tell a story. So I say that to illustrate there's a bunch of different ways that you can tell a story. And I want to put people on notice to always be thinking about ways to tell their center story, because ultimately that is your goal in every media interaction that you have, is to get your story out there. That might not be the stated goal in why someone approaches you, but that is your goal. So and to effectively do that, you want to be grounded in your mission. That sounds like a soundbite, if you will, but it is foundational and fundamental. But I can't stress enough that knowing your mission, integral, foundationally for you personally, so that you know it like the back of your hand and you can articulate it in any given situation, is imperative, because it will keep you grounded when you are maybe potentially caught off guard or have something thrown your way. So that's first and foremost, is knowing what you're doing and knowing why, and then also equipping your people and continually reminding them of that, and yourself. I mean, again, it sounds so basic that we might take it for granted and we might kind of put it to the side, but something as silly as having a sticky note somewhere on your daily workspace to remind you of that, because there's always days that you need, we put scripture up here and there to inspire us, but whatever you can do, big picture and little picture, to keep yourself mindful of that is always good, because it's a good reminder too, when times are tough, of why you're doing that. So knowing your mission, knowing what you're doing and knowing why you're doing it, and equipping and educating and empowering your people to be able to do that, is kind of like the foundational way to be able to then approach effective communications. Now, that said, being effective communicator comes naturally to some folks, not so much to others. But there are some fundamentals, being clear and concise and confident. Well, again, those are foundational and basic, and not necessarily always come easily, but practice makes perfect. That's why I say to keep reminding yourself of those things. And Andrea had touched on the idea of planning, having a communication plan. We'll get into that a little bit more later. But those, being prepared is huge as well. And a communication plan is part of that. But being prepared sometimes starts with getting up every day and reminding yourself of what you're doing and why. And also reminding yourself of who's in charge. The Lord is in charge. You can, we are blessed in this work to be able to we don't have to be afraid to invoke him directly or indirectly. We can speak about it, or we can stop what we're doing and say a prayer, what have you. So take him with you into any interaction, and he's gonna see you through that. And as long as you are mindful of that, you're doing his work, and you keep that humility, and you kind of give everything up to him, it's gonna help to keep you on track as well. But you got to know your stuff in the first place, and it's always good to in part of your preparations to explore your media landscape locally, regionally, nationally, internationally, and plan and prepare. So, I've just kind of talked on some general things. Andrea, I kind of see your wheels are turning a little bit. Please feel free to jump in here and interject.
Yeah, I was actually just thinking, because you actually said a lot of things that I literally do. Because what we have around the office is we do have both scripture surrounding us. They're on the walls, and the reminder of our why. Our mission is on the wall. And I have a picture of it because it's on our calendars right in front of me, so that I can go to that anytime I need to see. It's really in front of my eyes right now. But we also have baby cards, our story cards. So these are some of the stories that we have, so that in a moment's notice, I can grab one of those and easily talk about this woman who was in this situation. And thanks to her local pregnancy center, she was able to make that decision with confidence to choose life for her beautiful baby. And go to that quickly, because what I kept thinking as you were speaking is, if you're working at a pregnancy help organization, you are the expert in that conversation. As you are talking with a donor, a potential donor, with a reporter, with somebody on the street, you know more about your organization than they do. And so communicating effectively the positive work that you are doing through the stories, through the stats. If you do have a community impact report handy, that is always good to have right at your fingertips too. But mixing those stats with the stories, and when in doubt, just go to the stories, really does help communicate what you do in a positive way, because that is real life. People may not agree with what we do for whatever reason, but they can't deny the stories. And I know, Lisa, you and I talk about that a lot.
Definitely. And there's a difference between facts and stories, and they're both important. Facts are, say, my center, served this many women last year, and we get with this much in material goods, and we impacted the community in this way. You can actually tell, that's one way of telling that story. An individual client explaining how you impacted her life and talking about emotional aspects of that. That is a story, and that relies on emotions. Both facts and emotion are important in telling your story, but it's important also to keep them straight and know when they are more applicable. So, but again, they're all part of your story, of which, as Andrea said, you are the expert on. There's a saying, information is power. And it has value when you have it and someone else wants it or needs it. So if they're coming to you for something, and you've got that information because you're the expert, keep that in mind. You are the gatekeeper of that. And if you are prepared and you are ready to answer their inquiry with a well-crafted, well-thought-out, well-prepared message, then you're good to go. And that all, again, goes back to being really foundationally set with what your mission is and how you want to convey that. So, can't say enough to live that. And tell those stories every opportunity that you get.
And I know that we're always looking for ways to communicate those messages in a very positive way, because as Lisa indicated earlier, and this is something that I learned years ago from our friends at Alliance Defending Freedom, every interview is a competition. Now, there can be friendly competitions as well, of course, but they are trying to get a certain story out, or on a very specific set thought that they're wanting to communicate. And your job in communicating with them is, as Lisa mentioned, sharing your story, sharing the positive work. And I don't want it to seem as though every interview request that you get from a reporter is bad. They're not. There are different types of reporters out there that I'm sure that you guys can think of a couple in your own neighborhood who are good, solid journalists. And yes, I am labeling it journalists now because some are more activists in today's world. And Lisa and I have a lot of conversations about the difference between those two. Journalists do come at it with a very unbiased perspective, and they may have their own personal feelings, but you will not read that in their articles. So they are out there for the news and for the story, and they're looking to follow the work that you are doing. So I don't want to scare anybody by assuming that all reporters are bad. There are so many good storytellers out there who want to communicate the message of hope, or just be a reporter and share the news in their community. So there is a little bit of a difference. And we're going to go back to Lisa to understand the difference between these media inquiries and how to identify these red flags from maybe some nefarious foes who are looking to slam the work of pregnancy help, but also equip you so that you do not get caught off guard in these inquiries.
So yes, there are different types of media interactions or inquiries, if you will. Typically, there would be an interview request or simply a quote request. But there are also things that are called background discussion or off the record type discussions. And you won't necessarily have those as often, but they are equally important. And they are also a good opportunity for you to not so much get your story out there, but establish a good rapport with media. Because sometimes somebody might contact you to talk about something on background because they know you have information and are an expert in that area, which again, if you've established yourself that way, or, conveyed that to folks or through rapport with someone, it's good. But those are important conversations as well, because they are helping to get the narrative out there about pregnancy help, even if you are not identified in that given conversation. But it needs to be as clearly established what the criteria, circumstances, if you will, in a given situation is. You don't ever want to be in a situation where you're saying things thinking you are off the record and the journalist is not taking them that way. So they should, when you're approached for an inquiry, that should be clearly stated. And it is possible during the course of a conversation for you to get toward something that you maybe want to be off the record, and then you need to stop things and say, this is off the record. That's not ideal, but if it gets in that direction, certainly say this is off the record. And I would go back to the situation of if you are at all concerned about things, you can request to record an interview for your own protection, and also say this is for everybody's protection, because if it's recorded, then the journalist is protected as well. Many journalists will record their interviews. And, to Andrea's point, though, you don't want to necessarily be on paranoid, but you do want to be on guard. And this is where I would always think of the scripture from, I think it's Matthew chapter 10, verse 16, be as wise as serpents and as simple as doves. So you want to give everybody the benefit of the doubt, and you want to also approach these interactions with charity in your heart, that you're going to, you want to give everybody the benefit of the doubt, and that they're coming to you honestly, authentically looking for information, but you also have to protect yourself. Be educated, prepared, and have a plan in every situation. And if you are being honest about what you do, then you have nothing to hide. But it is certainly important to be watching for people that are as she mentioned earlier, nefarious in their intent, because it is out there. So again, just always, they should clearly state to you what they're looking for in terms of the content, the topic, subject matter, and the mode of interview. Are we going to talk in person over the phone? Are we going to talk in person face to face? Are we going to have a Zoom call? Or can we do this over email? And it also is acceptable to ask for questions in advance so that you've got them in writing. And that's also a record of your exchange with them. There are ways to protect yourself, and look at it as trust but verify. We're just going to take care of everybody on both sides. Send me the things in writing ahead of time so I know what to expect. And again, if somebody through the course of something, it seems to go off kilter from what they promised you ahead of time, if you stay on message and stay on point with what your organization is, what they do, what you do, your motivation, you can't go wrong. And if you give your best effort at an honest interaction with a member of the media, and they still insist on trying to trip you up, this, that, the other, well, shame on them ultimately. But if you've done your due diligence and you're operating in good faith, it should still end well for you.
Yeah, that's exactly right. As long as you are staying positive in your messaging, you're saying, not allowing yourself to get tripped up, which this is where that practice comes into play. Because if you're having these conversations, my favorite quote is, they can't edit what you don't say. And so if you ever do feel that they gave a gotcha question, or they're asking you about an organization that you're not a part of to get your reaction, you have every right to simply pause and say, I can't speak to that. Or if it is a question that you can tell is just very, very malicious, and clearly showing a bias, you can say, thank you so much for your time. We are done. Like, you have all full power to do that. And I know that takes confidence and takes practice. But once you kind of establish that, of you are protecting your organization, you are protecting your messaging, it becomes a lot easier. Again, there are some people who just have that as their mission, but there are also a lot of really good, curious reporters who are simply learning to, or wanting to learn more. They may have some misunderstandings as to what we do, what the pregnancy help community does, and they simply are seeking to understand. And so providing those stats along with the stories, and then your answers along the way, are very good. One thing that I did want to hit on that I didn't hear there, that is also very helpful in identifying any red flags, is as the communications are beginning and the request is being made for media, do your homework. Look into who's asking for the interview and who's going to be giving the interview. More often than not, it's going to be the same person who's requesting and going to be conducting the interview. But sometimes if it's a producer for a show to get you onto a podcast or a news interview, ask who the host is, who's going to be asking the questions. And then, as Lisa said, I always recommend asking for those questions in advance. They may not always give them to you, and that's fine. You can then decide whether or not it's worth pursuing. But it does give you a really good idea as to what the angle of their report or their segment is going to be. Anything else to add, Lisa?
Yes, their previous work is typically going to give you some idea of where they're coming from and what their intent might be. And again, we've been stressing not to be paranoid or fearful of the media, but there is another saying that's good to. It's a journalism adage that says, if your mother says she loves you, check it out. So fact check your mother. It's just the world we live in. So you need to, if you don't know fully a media outlet or a journalist that's approaching you, you have to check them out. You really, really do, just to be prepared. It's the best way to protect your organization. And then, as Andrea alluded to, if you positively pivot anytime they would throw something in your path that isn't, that's trying to bait you to get off message, that sort of thing, always positively pivot. As she said, they can't print what you don't say. If they're baiting you to say something bad about either the opposition, and certainly other pregnancy help organizations, you don't ever want to do anything like that. Don't even repeat the question back to them, because even a soundbite of you repeating what, some of that rhetoric could be taken out of context. So, the most you want to say is something like, oh, well, I appreciate that question. That's not my area of expertise, or, but what I can tell you is this, or what I am able to expound on is this. Always positively pivot. And if you've done that time and again, and they still seem to have an agenda, as Andrea said, to her point, you are more than welcome to say, thanks for this, and wrap it up. Because again, you are the expert, and you are also the boss of yourself. So don't allow your time to be used against you. Give yourself that permission. Let yourself off the hook to not be expected to answer questions that are out of your lane. It's not your job to do that. So you're in control of what you know and your mission and your organization. And that's what you should be talking about, because again, that's what you want to convey.
And I know that a lot of this is easier said than done, which is where that developing of a media policy within your organization and that practice really does come into play, because there are many positive outcomes that come from doing interviews, and you want to nurture those relationships, which we will get to in just a little bit, because there's a lot of good that can happen. We were very quiet as a charity, as a ministry for decades. I'll just be very candid there. We were the quiet charities that were there when women needed us, of course. But we didn't go around talking about the work that we do. One, because we're humble. Two, we're doing the work that we've been called to do, and we're doing it because it's the right thing to do. We're not doing it for spotlight. But what that did allow for several years is for others to write the narrative of pregnancy help organizations. And it's not always a pretty picture. So we have been very intentional in getting the stories out that are positive, because there's so much good that is happening every single day within our nation alone. Then expand that around the world. We know that there's about 4,000 organizations that are providing life-affirming help in the US. Those are maternity homes, those are social services, those are the pregnancy centers and such. So these stories happen every single day, and we do need to get them out to be more help with public awareness in the very positive form. And so that's one of our missions. I heard somebody, I think it was just last week, and I forget where, so I apologize, but they made a comment about the pregnancy centers aren't telling their stories. And it's like, well, no, the stories are being told. They may not be being picked up in national news and being portrayed for the good work that they do, but the stories are there. We have them at pregnancyhelpnews.com every day. We have them from you guys sending them to us and sharing them out with our partners across the movement. The stories are there in video format and print, and now it's just encouraging others to share their story a little bit more boldly, which I will say over the past 5 years, I've witnessed it. Pregnancy help leaders are standing up, sharing their stories on their social media, which is perfect. Continue to do that, because that is your owned media. That is you telling your story in very realistic and positive ways. But to get to the nitty-gritty details of a media policy within your organization, the first thing that you need to ask yourself right now, if you're leading an organization or listening and you work in pregnancy help, is, do you have a media policy? Have you guys taken time during a staff meeting to discuss it? Do you know who to go to if you get a phone call from a reporter? Does your receptionist know who to go to for that? You want to be certain that there are key people involved when media comes into play. And so internally, it's really good to establish some guidelines for staff engagement with the media. Look at it from two different standpoints. If a reporter were to enter your lobby today, what do you do? Document that. Say that you want them to stay in the lobby and the receptionist will come in and find the executive director. If the executive director is not there, who does she go to? And then if the executive director is there, what is the protocol? Do you say, oh, we need to schedule a time to discuss this further, or just simply get their information and you'll reach out via email? It sounds very basic, but because it tends to be something that you don't encounter too often, it's good to think of before it happens. And then the same is true for if somebody were to call you. Who is the line of command? Who needs to be connected with? And then when the questions come in, who among your organization can speak to the situation, and make sure that you have that conversation. There should be kind of a team that you can bounce these ideas off of internally in case a crisis communication comes up. Right now, we are seeing this. We're in the midst of the aftermath of Hurricane Helene, and that is an opportunity for organizations to come together, see what their needs are, and discuss how to communicate that not only to their supporters, but to their clients if building is shut down for a little bit, and then to the news outlets to communicate their needs effectively. Like, this is a moment where a team of people within a pregnancy help organization should be having an open conversation to determine who is speaking, what the communication is, what the message is, and how they will put that message out there, because that does come into play with media, social media, website, all of that is communications, and having a good media policy and a communications policy is really helpful in preparing, because I like to say, like, the more you prepare, the less you need it. So if you start taking the time to really establishing these policies and communicating it to your team, hopefully the fewer times that you would actually need to go grab that policy and utilize it. But that way you are prepared in case something does come up. And then I did want to kind of step into that crisis communication thing, because essentially I wanted to pull it down to 5 main points. In the moment, because we can do an entire other show about crisis communication in and of itself. We've done workshops as well, because it is such a unique situation. But it does come down to kind of 5 key points with both crisis communications and just your straight up media and communications plan. And that is to have your facts ready. Have those stats and stories available at your fingertips to communicate in when you are asked a question that it may get caught off guard. Pull to the story, because most of the stories that we encounter at our pregnancy help organizations communicate the message of hope, communicate what we do, and it pulls in the other angles of the mission. And one thing too is to stay in your lane. Lisa alluded to this earlier, but if you are asked a question about another organization, or let's say a medical question, and you are not a doctor, you should not be answering those questions. You can acknowledge it and say, that is a great question. I'm not the right person to answer that, but let me find out an answer for you. Or you may want to talk to this organization, or you can just say, that's a great question. I'm not the appropriate person, and leave it at that point. But the least thing that you would want to do is communicate incorrect messaging. So if you speak on behalf of your medical advisor and you are wrong, that opens up a can of worms that you then have to go into damage control, because you want to be certain that the medical professionals are speaking to the medical side of this work. The legal professionals are speaking into the legal side. You are the expert in your position. And so that is something within your organization you want to hold true, and just be honest. Lisa said earlier, the more that you are acknowledge that you are the expert in your field, the easier it is to communicate the message of what your center does. And so if you're just sharing the truth of how you're helping, and that's where those stories and those stats are very helpful, it really does help make the interview effortless. It's so much easier to talk about something you love or you know well than try to pull answers, because it's like, oh, I know that I knew that at some point back when I was 5. And it just goes much more effortlessly if you just speak to what you know. And then again, you want to be certain that all of your staff is aware of the messaging of your mission, of your media policy, and have those conversations often. And I think that my final note that I'm going to pull in here is to try to always maintain a positive attitude, because that helps you stay in control. While you may be getting some questions sometimes that you know where the claims came from, you can feel the bias against you. If you keep your cool and stay calm, it's going to communicate your message much more clearly. I have seen in different reports where people, not even necessarily pregnancy help, but when they clearly do have a bias against the person they're interviewing, they will describe shaky palms or sweat or their look. It's very interesting to see the angles that can paint a picture in a negative light, but it's also very good to see how when you stay poised and are smiling and have a confident look about you, how the picture paints itself, because you are sitting there again as that expert. You know what you're talking about. You know your center much better than they do, even though some may not think that. The reporters may have an arrogance about them, is where I was going with that one. But you just be confident in the work that you're doing and the lives that you're saving. And that helps you stay poised and in control, even when you may be asked a tough question.
So we are going to be delving into some specifics of media relationship building. And before we do, I wanted to touch on big picture things really quickly, just to shore some things up. We talked about how some media interactions are adversarial, and we can, there's a focus on that because that just seems to be the climate that we're in now. But that, they can be adversarial, they can be neutral, or they can be friendly. Sometimes you may have folks that are friendly to your cause and or they're collaborators. I mean, sometimes we will get, we collaborate routinely with others that are in life-affirming ministry to tell each other's stories simply because it is newsworthy within our respective spheres. But, so they can be neutral, adversarial, or friendly. It just depends. And you just need to be prepared to react and best tell your story in each of those scenarios. But I wanted to bring up an example that Andrea and I encountered at Pregnancy Help Institute this past summer, where we were talking about media with some attendees. And one gentleman had said he just has a policy of non-communication with the media because he did not see the benefit, and he saw all the adversarial components, and it was completely understandable where he was coming from because he saw that as protecting his organization. And we spent some time speaking with him about how even a crisis, if you will, or an adversarial inquiry is also an opportunity. And once we gave him some examples of that, he slowly started to realize that, yes, these are ways that we can turn things around. And, I would argue that the right information conveyed properly has the opportunity to overcome even substantial things that may be adversarial. And I have a couple of examples that I wanted to share. Earlier in my career, I was working for my Catholic diocese when the Da Vinci Code movie was first released. That was based on the Dan Brown book of the same name. And you may or may not know that was a series of books and corresponding films that were controversial for their portrayal of the church, and Opus Dei, a personal prelature that's affiliated with the church. I was at a Catholic communications conference in a workshop, and also attending at the time was the communications director for Opus Dei while that movie was out and in the media. So the group had previously been largely unknown. So when these books and movies came out, they seemed to control the narrative, and not in a positive way for Opus Dei. So the workshop presenter asked the Opus Dei communications director to share how they'd been responding to the inquiries with this movie coming out. And of course, everyone was eager to hear because that media coverage was pretty intense at the time. I remember, this was early in my career. I was struck because he was not unrattled. He was unrattled. He was not rattled by this at all. He simply said that they took the opportunity to educate the generally curious people by placing a stand out in front of their building to distribute flyers with information on the organization. Now, I'm sure this wasn't the only thing they did, but the biggest task associated with this was keeping that stand filled because the flyers kept flying out. People were interested, and they took that opportunity to educate them authentically. A simple effort in response to a pretty big inquiry, if you will. Again, that was not the entirety of their response, but it was a simple effort and minimal output, and who knows, untold benefit, I'm thinking. So anyone who showed up at their headquarters that was curious got the information that they were looking for. And Opus Dei was telling that story. It was an opportunity taken. The other example was more recent with one of the targeting of heartbeat that happened, targeting efforts, where an international website with associations to an unnamed global financier who's very committed to abortion was behind this. So they were trying to catch heartbeat and its option line at doing something wrong. So they wanted to be able to portray heartbeat and abortion pill reversal negatively. And they did this with fake contacts, contacting option line, falsely seeking information about abortion pill reversal. Well, I am happy to tell you that the option line folks and the APRN network, they're very good at what they do in caring for women in the normal course of their day. And therefore, they do this a lot. So therefore, it's not hard for them to spot when something is not right. So this is another opportunity to point out to you that if you get something that doesn't seem right in the way of an inquiry, listen to your gut. As always, you're supposed to chase these things down, but listen to your gut. It's usually the Lord telling you something. But they suspected something was up with these fake contacts, but they maintained their established processes. They continued doing what they were doing, seeing each contact through no matter what amount of time it took. even though this was a waste of time. In theory, on one level, it was a waste of time, but it was not a waste of time in that they were doing their job and maintaining what is the status quo for us, which is serving women and helping women and families. But the end result was that Heartbeat's Option Line and the Abortion Pill Rescue Network got caught doing what they normally do, serving women with compassion. So when Heartbeat was contacted, the response was the same, on message, life-affirming and true to the mission. So, they expectantly went ahead and still tried to attempt to spread this negative narrative, but they had to make it up. We didn't give them anything to go with. So, that's another example of if you're just doing what you're doing and you're doing it well and authentically, and you've got that mission in mind and the Lord's work and the Lord's providence, you're drawing upon that. You're not going to get knocked off from doing that. People can still say what they want about you, but if you've not given them anything, then they're going to have to be dishonest about it. So just, keep that in mind and stay the course. And part of that, though, as we've touched on, is a relationship with the media. And there are different types. We all know that there's national media, that's legacy media, if you will, the established networks and print and now online, things like the New York Times, CBS, NBC, all of those. You have local media, and you should know what those are in your respective area. And then independent media is a growing faction of things. And a lot of folks are really making changes and waves with this. But again, because they're independent, they may not be as well known to you or others. So it's, again, just highlights the importance of checking people and organizations out. But there are some independent journalists that are doing important work, so don't write them off. Do your best to be as educated as you can about the media landscape in your respective area, all the way from local on up to national, international, state, what have you. Monitor it to the best that you can. And everybody's situation is different as far as what your capabilities are, what comes naturally to you. I don't know what your resources are, but, a lot of people have a media person or somebody monitoring that. If you can delegate that, obviously make sure somebody is capable, competent, and trustworthy. But being in touch with them at all times. But so it's very good to monitor as much as you can and just see what's going on. But and this is, I'm going to take this opportunity also to say that media interactions shouldn't always be reactive. You want to be proactive as much as you can. That's part of telling your story as well. Building and nurturing relationships with local reporters can be proactive, or reactive. So if they're coming to you and you respond to them, obviously take them at their word, get to them what they're trying to do their job. If they're trying to get information from you, if you are providing that to them in the best way possible. Lots of times they have deadlines, but lots of times they can work with you on those deadlines. But once they have realized that you are going to communicate with them honestly and authentically and in good faith, then that's the first step to building rapport and building a relationship. And then they're going to know that they can come to you in the future to get information. But then also, if you start building rapport and trust, then it's easier for you to go to them and say, hey, this is coming up on our calendar. Would you want to cover it? You can pitch things to them, and that can take different forms or look differently as far as your situation and the situation at hand. But again, any opportunity you can to build a rapport with them and have a relationship so that at least you know that you can trust each other to help each other get the job done one way or the other if they're coming to you or if you're pitching something to them. It's all just about being good folks and operating in good faith. And once you've started that type of rapport and got that flowing, it just makes things easier down the road when anything comes up, whether it's positive or negative. Your crisis communications are going to flow so much better if you've got all these relationships established. And then likewise, if you've got something great to share, they're going to be receptive to hearing about it because you've dealt with them in good faith. Ongoing part of this is also tracking yourself in the media, tracking media coverage. You can set up alerts on social media and out there on the internet to come back and tell you what's going on. Always watch what's being said about you out there. You have to watch that like a hawk just to know what's going on. And you can also watch what's going on in your industry and to be prepared for things. And sometimes it helps you to plan going forward, to adjust your strategy going accordingly, because some things never change, but a lot of things do, and they'll do that regularly. The media landscape, it can be very volatile, but one thing that's constant is it's always changing. The news cycle right now is so fast, and you just got to be prepared to respond to whatever it is, good, bad, or in between. So again, this kind of all comes back to being grounded in your mission and well informed on what's going on, and just ready to articulate your story in every given scenario, equipping and empowering your folks, your team to be prepared that same way, and also just being as engaged as you can with the media, so that when that time comes, you can respond accordingly.
Yeah, thank you so much, Lisa. I know this is a lot of information. We actually have a lot of this also captured at heartbeatservices.org and our Center Defense Toolkit, which I know Christine's going to link to in our notes. But we encourage you to look into that because it does talk about these different elements. We do understand the dynamic right now where abortion is on the ballot in many states. So you may be getting increased inquiries to discuss, what does a pregnancy help organization do? Or what are you doing in your community to serve women? And these are opportunities. But again, it's something that, while we understand that not everybody has the number of staff available to monitor each and every situation, if you do get a phone call from your board or from a supporter who saw something in the news, I want you to remember something that you probably tell your clients all the time. It's okay to pause. Take that moment and work with your staff to kind of really gauge the situation and determine how you need to be communicating and who you need to be communicating with. This is an opportunity. Lisa, I'm so glad you brought up that gentleman at PHI at our Pregnancy Help Institute, because it is a different mentality. It's a mind shift to go from, no, we don't talk to the media, to, oh, I can make this an opportunity to communicate the situation, whatever it is, to my supporters, or make an ask, or have that conversation with the reporter and get the truth out there. So Heartbeat does have many resources available that kind of reiterates this and also prepares you with sample press releases, some sample community impact reports to really help prepare you for these potential interview requests. The media, Lisa and I talk to them all the time. Lisa is them. Also, it can seem daunting, but honestly, they're humans. And so they're not scary. They may have interesting motives at times, but as Lisa mentioned earlier, say a prayer before an interview request response. It'll really help calm your nerves, help you really be guided as to what the next steps are, and then give you that confidence before accepting that interview, because then you know that God is on your side. You should know that anyway, but God is on your side in all of this. And if you hold true to the mission of your work and communicate that through the stories and stats, I'm pretty certain that you will have a good outcome with your community, with your local media, and with anybody else. So tap into those resources and don't be concerned. Be smart, but don't be too concerned. And we are always here. I've had multiple conversations with people who have received inquiries. We're here to bounce those ideas off, to do one-on-one media coaching, and to help investigate if you feel a little nervous. So we're happy to talk that through with you here at Heartbeat International. So you should be willing and ready to speak to the media no matter when, what is happening in your community, so that you can be more confident and get the word out, because pregnancy help is good. And we want to do everything we can to really communicate that effective message.
Well, thank you, Lisa and Andrea. We had so much to unpack in this episode. I know it's even a little bit longer than typically we have an episode run, but that's okay. I think that we covered some good ground, and I know that we could go deeper into any of these topics. And so I encourage listeners to check out those show notes and stay tuned to Heartbeat, because we want to keep going deeper into this media training for you. And so if you are getting our newsletters, that's wonderful. That's a great way to stay tuned to what we're learning and what we can then share with you guys, our listeners and our affiliates, all of you in the pregnancy help world. We're so grateful for what you do each and every day. So With that, I wish you all a very blessed rest of your day, and thanks for listening to this episode of the Pregnancy Help Podcast.